So here we have a hand that's just too land heavy, too many mana sources. No way to get this Chancellor into the graveyard, although having Chancellor in hand is nice. So I'm going to mulligan. And, this is a 6 that I think we have to keep. And Faithless Looting is a great card to see because we can put this Gristlebrand into the graveyard with it, hopefully. And then we have multiple ways to bring that Gristlebrand back. But here's the card that foils that plan completely. So Deathrite Shaman is going to mean that we are essentially our plan is not going to work out. Assuming that our opponent keeps up green mana for the Deathrite, which they may actually not. We'll see. So yeah, it looks like our opponent's actually going to activate the Deathrite and play Leovold here, which is they don't know what deck we're playing, so makes some amount of sense. And they may also have counter magic at the ready. So the unfortunate part of Leovold is that we're not going to actually get to draw the 2 cards here, of course, but we have to cast the Faithless Looting. So I'm going to discard the Gristlebrand and probably want to keep this Lotus Petal. Yeah, I think we need to keep the Lotus Petal to play around a potential Daze. Now, the issue here is that because our opponent has this Leovold, this Gristlebrand may not be enough to win the game, even if we get it into play. So, if our opponent has a Force, then we're just dead, but our opponent does not have the Force. So we're able to get Gristlebrand into play. The draw 7 part of the Gristlebrand does not do anything against Leovold, so we're not going to be using that part of the card. We're just going to be hoping that attacking for 7 in the air with lifelink can win us the game, basically. And I understand why our opponent just went for that Leovold there, but we were able to play around a potential Daze if our opponent had Daze. And now it's just a good old-fashioned race at this point. If our opponent plays a bunch of creatures here, we're potentially going to be behind in the race. And there's another creature. It is going to be a Delver of Secrets. But the fact that our creature does gain 7 life is pretty nice. We have the ability here to flashback a Faithless Looting, but I'm just not going to. So if this Delver flips, it can also be used as a blocker. Force of Will being the revealed card, so definitely a weird game we have going on here. I guess we could activate Griselbrand on our opponent's turn to draw a single card. Doesn't seem great, though. Our opponent's all the way down to 10. They can start attacking us, but I think we're still favored to win this game, as weird as it is. Just on the back of this one. Well, it is quite a good card, let's be honest. We have a Griselbrand in play. Got it into play on turn 2. And that's why I didn't lead off on that Badlands on turn 2. Just the swamp. I mean, it's a little bit more of a disguise. Our opponent could have maybe seen through it. But if our opponent plays something like a Liliana or something like that, well, that's very bad for us. So, yep, we're going to have to go ahead and sacrifice our Griselbrand at this point. Have the Animate dead to bring it back, but if our opponent does have a blue card, Force of Will just be game over. So I guess we'll see here in a moment if our opponent does have everything. Force of Will, pitch Delver. That's good enough for me. Thought we were the favorites, but then Liliana ruined our day. So we're on the play, which is nice, of course. Board in these duresses to take cards like Force of Will, strip those out of our opponent's hand as early as possible. Besides that, I actually don't think there's a card we really need to be boarding in. Needle on Deathrite is good. But being on the play, we have Thoughtseize to potentially force our opponent to discard a Deathrite. We also have Collective Brutality. So in terms of sideboarding cards out, Tidespout Tyrant, it's okay, but I think the other creatures are more important overall. And one Chancellor, I'm okay with shaving on that. Having one Chancellor is great. Having multiples is in your opening hand. I actually like less than just having the one. So sometimes I'll just shave a Chancellor in weird spots. But I think a lot of players who play this deck just never cut Chancellor. It is insane in some matchups. Like if you get it into play against Storm or a deck like that, it's going to be insane. Here we're really hoping for a turn 1 or turn 2 way of getting one of these, optimally Griselbrand or a Sire of Insanity, into play. So let's see what we got here. And alright, so we have we have a weird one here. So we can get this Elishnorn into play if we want to Thoughtseize ourselves and then exhume it back. I think we have to hope that that's good enough. I'm going to keep this. What we can do is we can also duress our opponent on turn 1 to get a potential Force of Will out of our opponent's hand. So I think we want to do that. This way, if we draw something like a Griselbrand, we can also, or a Faithless Looting, we can change our plan on turn 2. Well, this is the exact hand we did not want to see from our opponent. So multiple Force of Wills, Flusterstorm, and Surgical Extraction. Our opponent does only have one land, but these cards are all insane versus us for the most part. I'm going to take the Surgical. But we're definitely going to have to change up our game plan. And that's just going to mean we're not going to be winning early. We're going to have to try to hope that our opponent maybe misses a land drop or two. And fight through these forces that we know about. But if our opponent's cracking the Misty, that may mean that our opponent just has a play here, like a Ponder or a Brainstorm or a Deathrite or something of that nature, which, you know, it's not great. Because we saw a hand of no actual proactive turn 1 plays, unless our opponent just drew one. So what cards that we're looking for at this point are Collective Brutality, because that would basically force our opponent to use a counterspell, but it would also put the Elesh Norn in the graveyard, or something like a Faithless Looting. We're no longer thinking about Thoughtseizing ourselves. And there's Deathrite, so it looks like our opponent just has everything again, like last game. So I'm just going to pass the turn here, not feeling great about this situation. We can potentially think about hard casting a creature, because we have double Dark Ritual, but we also don't have a creature like a Sire of Insanity. Would be one that we could say hard cast, you know, theoretically. Alright, so our opponent is going to get this Goyf into play, it looks like. So we drew Faithless Looting. That could be a start. Could be a start. Alright, so we got the Sire into our hand. Plus Exhume. So I like discarding the Sire and the Elesh Norn. That way we have outs. If we say top deck another reanimation spell, we're assuming that our opponent still has the same hand of Flusterstorm, double Force of Will, which is the unfortunate part here. So I think what we may want to do is simply pass the turn and try to Thoughtseize away the... Well, if we Thoughtseize here, it's just going to get... We can take away our opponent's Flusterstorm. I guess that's fine. I guess we go for the Thoughtseize. And our opponent's probably going to Flusterstorm it. So the nice thing about having 2 creatures in the graveyard with Exhume is that, say our opponent removes 1 with Deathrite Shaman, we still can get the other one back. So our opponent is going for Flusterstorm here. It's going to be four copies, but what we can do now is we can actually just go ahead and try to pay for this Flusterstorm. So we can sacrifice the Lotus Petal, go Dark Ritual, and then pay for Flusterstorm. And then potentially hope that our opponent just has those 2 forces and not another blue card in hand. So I think that's what we do. So I'm gonna go for the Ritual play. And this is gonna get us up to 5 mana. So hopefully next turn we can force through this Exhume. If we are able to take a Force of Will. So hopefully okay, so our opponent's actually gonna force this Thoughtseize, which we're happy about. Not really sure why our opponent did that, but now we're basically in a spot where if our opponent doesn't have another counterspell or surgical, we can get either the Sire or the Elishnorn into play. Of course, we would rather have the Elishnorn because the Sire of Insanity just may not be good enough. It essentially just trades with Tarmogoyf. Entomb is a pretty good draw, but we wish we had one more land at this point. To be able to get the creature we would like into the graveyard. Well, I think I'm going to go for passing the turn here and hoping that our opponent kind of messes this up. We could Exhume, force our opponent. Well, it looks like our opponent actually just didn't use a Deathrite, so yeah, this was what I meant by hoping that our opponent messes this up. Looks like that might be happening. We'll see. So we're going to take the 5 here, go to 9. Now we can go end of turn Entomb. Now we still can't beat a counterspell, but hey, we fought through double Force of Will, Surgical, and two Deathrite Shaman, so I think it's that time where we just go ahead, go for the Exhume. So now our opponent's in a situation where they can exile one of these creatures. The reason why I didn't do it last turn, if our opponent just exiles the Elishnorn in response to this Exhume, then we would just get back the Sire of Insanity. Probably not enough to win the game. Now we can potentially get back a Griselbrand or an Elishnorn. Our opponent cannot exile 2 of our creatures with only the 1 tropical island to produce green mana. But it's unclear what those last 2 cards actually are in our opponent's hand, because it just felt weird the way our opponents played the game. hasn't really added up. Because I thought when we looked at our opponent's hand on turn 1, we were basically dead at that point. But now, hey, we have a Griselbrand in play, so that's good. Maybe it's not going to be enough. Hard to say. But we can't activate it because our opponent has this Deathrite Shaman that they can use to drain us for 2. So we are unfortunately put into a position where we just have to pass. But our opponent has removal for the Griselbrand. That will be game over. Of course, we would have rather had the Elesh Norn. I would have killed both Deathrites immediately. And it looks like this could be a Liliana. It is. And our opponent's going to Edict us. That's going to be the match.